Hey there. Although I am involved with CADAC, the Center of ADHD Awareness Canada, the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the participants and do not reflect those of CADAC. And now, cue the music.
This is the Impulsive Thinker Podcast, a show for high-achieving ADHD entrepreneurs. Together, we will inform and educate you about how to improve your self-awareness while developing systems, routines, and habits for conquering the entrepreneurial world. Here is your host, André Brisson.
Hey there, and thanks again for listening to another episode of the Impulsive Thinker Podcast. Today's episode has been brought to you by CADAC, the Center of ADHD Awareness Canada, sponsor of our podcast. Today I've got a very special guest, my oldest daughter, Zélia, or like she likes to be known as Zed.
No.
She is, at the time of the recording, 13 years old. And hello, how are you today?
Hi, I am very good. How are you?
So far, so good. So you agreed to come on this episode and to talk about ADHD and me and from a perspective of a family. So you remember me when I was not diagnosed,
Yes.
when things got really ugly at home because I wasn't controlling my emotions very well.
Mm-hmm.
Once I got diagnosed and start working on and understanding ADHD. Can you just share with everyone, honestly and truly, me at the time of what I've been calling that life tempest, when it was very, very tough to be around?
Yeah. So sometimes after a long day at work, he'd come home and just kind of sometimes not be the best, kind of lash out sometimes and not stop and take a break. And kind of just...
What do you mean not stop and take a break?
Like now, if you know you're about to kind of do something that would not be great, you will like kind of walk away or take a break or just think about what you're doing and kind of recognize that that's not what you're supposed to be doing. But back then it wasn't that way, and it was just kind of being very impulsive, not thinking before doing.
Yeah. Yep, that's very true, the impulsive not thinking before doing, which is definitely an ADHD thing. During that time, how did that make you feel?
Well, at the time, we didn't know that you had ADHD, so sometimes it could be upsetting, sometimes could make you a bit confused.
What do you mean by confused?
As to why, like if it was just because you had a long day at work or something happened during the day, but we didn't do anything, it would make it would make me a little confused as to why you were upset at us.
Okay, so just to clarify, what you're talking about is me exploding and having big emotional outbreaks,
Yes.
yelling, screaming, almost tantrums at time.
Yeah.
Right? So what she's referring to is the emotional dysregulation of just lashing out for no reason. Mm-hmm. That's how you guys perceived it or saw it.
But now we know because you've explained. And as you're learning about ADHD and kind of what it is and how it works, we know now that sometimes it gets in the way. And now we know that. So
what do you mean it can get in the way?
Well, now we know that if you just can't like control kind of what's happening, we know that sometimes it could be ADHD instead of just you. Because now we know that you have ADHD and it's not like... It's
not the real me. It's the ADHD that's taken over.
Yeah,
so
but
you understand that. It's still though it doesn't excuse the behavior.
But yeah, we understand what it is because before we didn't. We thought it was just.
So it's more personal.
Yeah.
So,
well, I did. I don't know how.
I think it's fair to say that Sophie and Mommy, they definitely thought for a while it was personal.
Yeah.
and that's a very important thing to understand. People without ADHD, it's not a character flaw. We actually know what we're doing is not correct, but we do not have the inhibition to prevent it or to stop it. And when you're undiagnosed, you don't even know why or understand why these emotional disruptions, explosions are happening, since we feel emotions intensely, like 1,000 times more than most. It's the inhibition. We know we know how we're supposed to behave, but at times we just can't do it. So I think that's what you're referring to. You know, it wasn't the person behind that was doing it. It was the ADHD. It's an episode on ADHD. Again, not an excuse, but an explanation of what's going on. And I think we've done this quite a few times, is have a conversation where we try to figure out how to prevent it for the next time.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so there was probably 3-4 years I was not fun. I was not fun to be around.
Fun at times when nothing was wrong, but yes.
So, okay, no, let me go back here. You said a very key thing here about if I had a very big, busy day at work, you knew that when I come home?
Yes.
How?
Well, usually when you come home, when you used to come home, you would walk in the door like, oh my gosh, this and that about your day at work. And then you would kind of just explain to mom kind of what happened during the day, and not a very tone that could be perceived as a nice one. So kind of after a while, and then when we eat dinner, we talk about what happened during the day. So you would kind of explain that. And yeah, kind of the stuff that you were saying. Or sometimes after a while, you just kind of like, if he's in a bad mood, just kind of leave him alone. So that, because he probably had a bad day at work. You know?
Right. Yeah, you guys had to leave me alone so you wouldn't get the effects. And then that's interesting because I don't think you guys realize this, but by doing that, you were protecting yourself and giving me space. You thought it was doing well. I actually felt like I was being ignored.
Oh.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So I felt I was being ignored, so that almost make it worse. Because with the ADHD brain, we also, once we get the rejection emotion hits, it hits harder.
Yeah.
So it was quite the struggle to have very upset, lash out at the family for no reason, and then be ignored, quote unquote. But that's not what you guys were doing. You were just giving me space to cool off, but at the same time not get a tongue lashing.
Yeah.
So what did we learn? So then I got diagnosed. Then I started to learn a lot about it. Did you learn a lot about it during that time too?
I did, yes. Because you didn't just say like, oh, I have ADHD, cool. Like you went and you researched it so you knew what it was and more about it, which I think was good because then we could learn more about it as well. Like sometimes after you've been getting better at not lashing out, which you actually have not done in a while, which is good in a couple years. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll just kind of be like, oh yeah, I learned this today, and explain that. And when I tell you stuff that happens at school, if I'm having trouble or just a story, usually you find a way to make it into a lesson, which can be kind of annoying sometimes, but it's fine. After a while of you kind of researching it and learning more about it, I just kind of learned more about it myself. And now I know how to, I know sometimes, I'll know that if something happens, it's not you, it might just be ADHD. Mm-hmm. Same with me, I know how to control it better, which is good.
So what do you mean by just like me?
Well, sometimes the stories that you tell, I can very much relate to, not being able to just, sit down for a while and stuff. Sitting at a computer all day is probably really boring for you. Yeah, so I definitely couldn't do that all day. Definitely thinking before you say stuff or do stuff. I've been
impulsivity?
Yeah, I've been getting better at thinking, oh, is this a good idea? Should I say this? What will happen if I do? And kind of stuff like that.
Okay, so let's talk more about the impulsivity here, because I remember a big conversation we had in the shop where you were having struggles at school, and then we talked about the impulsivity, right? I think if I remember, the explanation was, I think I understand what you're talking about, Zélia. It's like you having, all of a sudden your brain goes, hey, it'd be funny if I put my nose up that person's nose.
Your nose.
And the next thing you know, it's, crap, my finger's up their nose. What happened? And then you went, exactly. I don't even think about it. It just happens. And that's exactly the impulsivity.
Just to clarify, I did not put my finger up anyone's nose.
No, that was an example. It was an example. So what kind of things did you learn from our life lessons conversations?
I don't know. You just kind of, I don't know how to explain it. After a while, I can't remember anything specific. Can't think of anything that I can make a list of. But I think just after what you just said, after telling you something that's happened at school or with a friend or anywhere, you just kind of tell me how I can, and like not improve, but fix that and
Manage it.
Thank
Manage
you.
it.
Find a way to manage it, and that just makes it easier for me. Like if you didn't learn anything about ADHD and you didn't, or if you did and you didn't share it with me, I feel like I'd definitely be struggling a lot more with school and friends.
I know the one thing that I really latched on to in my transition from undiagnosed to diagnosed and improvement was mindful meditation.
Yes.
And we did quite a bit of that together, and you actually do it by yourself. Are you still doing that? Before we ask you how you're doing it, what did you find about the mindful meditation?
I don't think I did it enough to find that it like changed. Like it was nice at the end of the day before bed just to like take 10 or 20 minutes to just kind of sit and relax and like kind of lets everything out. Obviously you're not like saying anything, but it just kind of gives you time to breathe and, go over your day.
And slow the brain down.
Yeah, before bed too is really good because then you're not going to bed thinking about, oh, I should have done this today. Oh, I could have done this better. That went bad.
So, yeah, slowing your brain down so you can fall asleep too is another key one. So, is there anything else you want to add?
About?
Anything?
I don't know. I don't think so.
So, you still find yourself struggling with organizing it at school, getting stuff done?
I think I tend to leave certain things to the last minute, which I have been getting better at because I have just recently discovered that leaving things to the last minute is not always fun because you only have, one more day to do it. And especially because I've been doing extra things at school, I don't have as much time to do certain things. So
do you think that's actually helping you stay more organized and get things done?
Definitely, I have to be motivated to do things. Like, I can't just be like, oh, I got to do this. Let me go do it. Because then the result won't be as good. But sometimes at random, I'll just be like, oh, I feel like doing this right now. Like, if I'm in the middle of reading a book, sometimes I'll kind of just go off track and be like, oh, this is a really good idea for the TED Talk I'm doing. And I'll just kind of take out a sticky note and write that down because I don't want to lose that idea. But, yeah.
So how did you come up with that idea to write down on a sticky note? Why write it on a sticky note?
So I don't forget. I used to write things on my hands, but that's obviously not a very good idea.
Yeah, because it washes away. So you're already coming up with your own systems and mechanisms to overcome the symptoms that you do have, right?
Oh, remember what I want to say earlier. So, if I don't have the motivation to do something, I won't be able to do it to my full abilities. Like, if I want to clean my room, but I don't feel like cleaning my room, the clothes are just going to get taken off the floor. That's it, and they'll be put in my laundry bin. But if I was motivated to clean my room, my laundry would be done, my desk would be cleaned off, my dresser would be completely clean, and my room would be vacuumed. Same thing with schoolwork. Right now we're doing coding at school. If I was just told, okay, do coding, I wouldn't be able to come up with something as well I wouldn't be able to create something as well as if I was motivated to do it.
So what do you mean by motivated? Like interested?
Or just like sometimes I get random urge like, oh, I'm going to do this right now. Or
an impulsive urge.
Yeah. Also hyperfixation, I think is what it's called.
Hyperfocus,
sorry. Also sometimes I'll be working on something like earlier today I was reading my book and I was like almost on my chapter, the 20-minute timer went off, and I'm like, I want to read. I want to keep going with the story, even though it wasn't that interesting. So I kind of totally didn't keep reading when I wasn't supposed to. But, yeah, sometimes if I'm working on something, I'll just kind of keep going, which sometimes isn't always the best, especially at school when we have time limits for things, which sometimes I feel like is not a great idea because some people, I don't think I'm the only one in the class who struggles with, like, having a time limit on things because sometimes you'll just be near the end of the time limit and you'll have a really good idea and then it's over and you can't continue with it.
Right. Let's go back to again, like pre-diagnosed, like undiagnosed ADHD and the home life. How hard was that during that time for you as a daughter or a kid?
During school or like just in general?
No, the whole family life. Like when I was doing the emotional dysregulations all over the place.
I mean, sometimes I felt like I just should be in my room by myself. Maybe sometimes I thought that you didn't want to be like with us, so that made us kind of want to be away.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just mostly for me confusing because I was still like little and I didn't really understand like what ADHD was. Well, we didn't even know that it was a thing. I didn't really understand that it wasn't you, obviously. So I think for me mostly it was just really confusing and sometimes like I don't know how to explain it. Mostly just confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes made me upset because I didn't know why you were lashing out sometimes. But
not sometimes. Let's be honest. It was not sometimes. For a good year and a bit, it was not sometimes.
Yeah, and sometimes the smallest things could like set you off. Like,
oh, yeah.
You couldn't find, this is just an example, like you couldn't find a Lego piece for your Lego set. You get really mad and start like swearing all the time.
It's funny because it's true. Yeah. It's not my proudest time, but I got to say, though, I'm very, very lucky and fortunate that I do have you and Sophie in my life and stuck around. Mm-hmm. And Mommy. She's very patient and...
well, she understands it too now, which is good.
She understands it too, but at the time she did not understand it. And so I really appreciate you, excuse me, being honest and sharing this because I wanted to share this with you, the listener, because undiagnosed, you did not know what's going on. And at the same time, even though if you're diagnosed or you just start to kind of let things go and let your symptoms take over you, like this is the results that happen. Like it's one thing to do it at work. There's one thing to do with your customers, but to do this stuff at home and expect them to stick around still, or thinking that they're, it's the reality is sometimes we're a little more ruder, we're a little more impatient with the people we love the most, and that's the thing at home. Or there's a lot of times, Zélia, I was not home because I was always working late.
Yeah, and that was another thing was during, like, your work wasn't going great in general. Like, that was the time where you kind of, you were finishing the one company and starting up the other one. So that also was kind of difficult for you, which I think made the ADHD even worse.
Make it worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was not home a lot. Usually I was gone, but when you guys woke up, most times I'd show up once you guys were in bed. Mm-hmm. Right? And then go in on the weekends or go on long business trips.
Well,
right?
Yeah, now you leave kind of when we wake up, but that's just so that you wake up early anyways. But you come home kind of when we get home from school now, which is nice to have you at home now.
Right. And I'm making a conscious effort and decision for that because of what I've learned over the last 3 years. And so, like, to go back to what I started before was, the ADHD, even though it's managed, at times can run away from you. And the emotional dysregulation, like Zélia just explained, you think kids don't see it or understand it, or you're trying to hide it. You think you hide it. What Zélia just showed us today is I wasn't hiding it. I thought I was, but they pick up a lot more than they put on. And I think what we also got to do is if we're having bad days to share that, or even reach out to your spouse or your kids and saying, hey, what else do you see is going on with me, or these habits that I've have that's affecting you, especially with young kids and girls, man. Like I got to live with 3 girls and 2 cats, right? Like my God, me. But it's you're affecting their self-confidence. You're affecting their day-to-day. Like, do you want your kids to show up from school stressed out, not knowing what's going to happen when you show up from work? And then once I start to settle down and start seeing what's going on and manage my symptoms and get therapy, then I started to realize is that that's not the life I want my kids. I want them to come home to be safe, feel safe, not to say, oh, crap, what kind of a mood is Papa going to be in, right? And that's damaging and hurtful. But like I said, I'm very fortunate. I got open-minded kids. I got an open-minded wife, and extremely patient, very, 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 very patient. So what I wanted to portray here was that ADHD can hurt the family, hurt the ones that are most special to you. Now, you said something earlier, but before we hit record, was ADHD can be a pain in the butt. but yet not. Let's end up on a positive note here. What does ADHD, your ADHD papa, do to make it fun?
Sometimes you get random, like, oh, I want to do this, and it's like something fun, so we'll go and do that. Sometimes we're working on something, and you get like the hyper focus, and we're like on it. Like Lego sets, we're like, oh, we'll work on it for about 20, 30 minutes, and then 2 hours later, we're still doing it. But yeah, I think definitely just over time, you learning what it is, learning more about it, like you're learning more about it every day, definitely makes it easier for us, because like what you learn, you'll tell us, which is good, because then we know more about it as well, because we're like, we know it's not you, it's ADHD.
Right, and I openly share, right? I'm not reading it and keeping it to myself. Mommy actually learned a lot about it too, but I'm open and honest about it, and we discuss it, right? Cool. Anything you want to end? Anything to say? One thing the listener should be aware of?
There's pros and cons, both to ADHD. There might be more cons, but there are still pros.
And the pros outweigh the cons?
Sometimes.
So it's like I've always said, as long as the goal is to manage the symptoms so they become your strengths. And once we do stop managing them, then they become a disorder and become symptoms. So it's not an easy road, but it's something we got to do. And it's a choice to do something about it or not. Zélia, Mapsit Pipun, thank you very much for coming on and being truthful and honest. And we need this. And I need the listeners to hear the effects the undiagnosed ADHD had on our family, and that hopefully someone out there can learn. Thanks again to you, the listener, for listening, and I appreciate your gifting us your time to listen. I'd like to hear your feedback about today's story with my oldest daughter, Zélia. You can send it to me. I really want to hear about this one. This one's near to my heart, no pun intended. But you can send it to me at questions@theimpulsivethinker.com. And thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Impulsive Thinker podcast. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion for the show, please visit theimpulsivethinker.com. The Impulsive Thinker podcast is produced by Tactical Breakthroughs and hosted by Zélia Brisson. Remember, ADHD is only a part of you, not all of you.